Good afternoon, Professor. I'm so glad to present to you the article that I choose. The name of this one is Exploring Task Difficulties in ESL Listening Assessment. So, to introduce you, this article was developed by Jeff Brunley and Helen Stylen in Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. So, this article was carried out under the Special Project Research funded by the Commonwealth Department of Immigration and Multicultural and Indigenous Affairs through the AMEP Research Center. Additionally, this article reports on the exploratory study that set out to investigate these questions in the context of the certificates in spoken and writing English (CSYE) and outcomes-based curriculum and assessment framework used within the federal government-funded Adult Migrant English Program (AMEP) in Australia. So, the rationale consists on the particular challenge for this one that tax designer face in competence-based assessment systems that are then briefly outlined. Hence, practical implications for assessment tax designs are explored too. Although outcomes-based approaches offer a number of advantages, including closer alignment of curriculums and instructions, and potentially better communication between stakeholders, a range of concerns have been expressed in relation to the validity and reliability of the assessments that are used to determine levels of achievement. So, to continue, the following statements state that this study focuses on the effects of task characteristics and task conditions on learners' performance in competence-based listening assessment tasks that require learners to demonstrate specific listening behaviors. Also, the key variables investigated included the nature of the input and the response mode. Okay, to continue, the core objective planted or proposed by the article was to identify key task characteristics and task conditions that were most likely to affect the difficulty of CSYE listening assessment tasks. Additionally, other objectives that I consider relevant are determining the extent to which these characteristics and conditions were accounted for in the range of statements. The last one is to investigate the impact on the test of systematically varying task characteristics and task conditions in cases where clear effects were noted, to explore possible reasons and for different type of items difficulty. The literature review. To explain this, I have to mention that it is divided in some parts, in some main concepts. The first one is the listening competencies. This talks about the learners may preview questions before they heard the text. No indication of the time recommended for preview was given, nor whether learners may use their dictionary during the time to look up vocabulary items. No specific items type are recommended, but multiple items are specifically excluded. The second concept is selection of variables. The variables that were identified for initial investigations were chosen for both practical and theoretical reasons. First, from the practical standpoint of comparability, it was important to establish whether there were particular task conditions or task characteristics whose omissions from the range statement. At the same time, from the theoretical perspective, the study presented an opportunity to investigation of the hypotheses that have been advanced in the research literature concerning those variables that affect second language listening comprehension. The third concept is investigating listening task difficulty. This at the same time has differing in some concepts. The first one is terminology. The purpose of this was to adopt of task proposed by the Association of Language Testers in Europe. The second one is the factors affected task difficulty. It is divided at the same time in the nature of the input, the nature of the assessment task, and the individual listener factors. The fourth concept is key variables investigated. This consists on the practical difficulties involved in investigating effects of all these variables simultaneously. It was decided to narrow the range of investigations to 5 key variables that seemed most relevant in the context of the CSYE. Listening competence under investigation and try to isolate their specific effects on test scores. The 5 key are speech rate, text type, and the number of hearings. Input source, it is live versus audio recorded, and the last one is item format. Now the 5th concept is the assessment of tags. I have to mention that in the story or in the article there were proposed 3 tags. The first one is education, the second one is job, and the third one was talk about dogs. And all of those are monologues that were given to the people by the teachers. Now, the conceptual framework. There are 2 concepts that, involve all the article. The first one is outcomes-based approaches to assess and reporting. One of the consequences of these trends has been the widespread adoption of description of achievement known as standards, benchmark, and competency or attainment targets as stakeholders. Was mentioned, or it was said by Brinley and McKay. And the second one is background, because these certificates in spoken and written English. Even though it describes learning outcomes of 4 different languages proficiency levels in terms of language competency, the proficiency levels are roughly equated to the following range of levels on the Australian second language proficiency ratings. The ASLPR. a writing scale that is used in conjunction with an oral interview to assess learners' proficiency at entry to be a map. Okay, the methodology. They use a mixed method approach. It is quantitative and qualitative analysis of text scores, subjects the speech rate and item format, influence, tax, and difficulty. To this article, 284 adults participate. They are ESL learners enrolled in Certificate 3 in teaching centers or centers across 3 states in Australia. Okay, the first one is New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. Although all listening passages or all the listening material were audio recorded except the live version, because it was read from a script by the teacher, and the continuous scoring was used with each responsive being accorded correct or incorrect status or status. Missing or incomplete items were marked as incorrect. Okay, just to start with the last part of my presentations, I'm going to talk about the discussions, and it is divided in some concepts at the same time. The first one is the interaction of task competences. Okay, this analyze and suggests that particular combination of item characteristics appear either to accentuate or attenuate the effects on difficulty. Any conclusion regarding the effects of any single task or item characteristics on difficulty will therefore to be carefully qualified the light of what is known about its interaction with other variables. In this case, it could be said that other words response seem to be easier if there is clear lexical match with the text. The second one is implication for assessment type designs. This talks about the validity issues, and this at the same time has highlighted a number of problems involved in developing valid and reliable assessment of listening competences in outcomes-based systems of assessment and reporting, such as the CSYE. The reliability issues they present, these problems of construct validity are exacerbated by the fact that under normal classroom conditions it is unlikely that teachers will have time to develop a text of enough length or the sufficient length to meet minimum standards of reliability, even for the lowest text assessment. And the last one is the practical issues. It was defining competence and standardizing tasks. The outcomes for these points to the need for more detailed and tightly defined specifications of the listening competence investigated on the article, and by extension the other competences. Now, to conclude the conclusions, in this study they set out with the practical goal of determining whether changes in task characteristics and task conditions in competency-based listening tasks will result in difference in text performance. Thus, given these complexities, we must conclude that the rather simplifies notion of difficulty as reflecting in items difficulty. Statistics is of limited usefulness in understanding what happens when an individual candidate interacts with an individual item. And that's all, teacher. I'm so glad because you heard my presentation, and I hope you like this one. Bye bye.